So during the Dark Ages, during the medieval period, the Roman Catholic Church had this bromance with Aristotle. They're just kind of obsessed with Aristotle and Greek philosophy, and all these monks are geeking out on Aristotle's works and everything. And so these guys are incorporating a bunch of garbage from Greek philosophy into their theology, which is where a lot of bad doctrine in the Catholic Church, and even Protestants have inherited some of this stuff, just junk that comes from Greek philosophy into theology via Aristotle and these monks that read his work. Okay, well, here's the thing. Aristotle is also pretty much the beginning of a lot of histories of science. Like if you study the history of science, you're pretty much always going to start talking about Aristotle, because he's kind of the first one who did a lot of science as we know it. Here's the only problem, is that he was pretty much wrong about every single thing. And I'm not saying that Aristotle is a dumb guy. He was extremely smart, and somebody had to kind of start the conversation, get the ball rolling. And so, his ideas are pretty good as far as they're logical, they make sense. But the problem is, this is before the scientific method and kind of modern ideas about reasoning. He kind of just described the way he thinks that things probably work, but it's not really based on experimentation. It's more just based on, here's how it should work. Here's what makes sense to me type of stuff. It was a lot of bro science from Aristotle. Okay, but here's the thing about that. Because the Catholic Church loves Aristotle, a lot of Aristotle's scientific ideas just became considered like church dogma. Okay, so the church, and I'm talking about the Roman Catholic Church, they were stuck scientifically for a long time because they said, hey, you have to believe in these certain scientific ideas. And one of those ideas is that, well, the universe is totally perfect, and so that means that all of the heavenly bodies up in the sky are moving in perfect circles. Just these perfect, beautiful circles. Now, anybody who actually studies science, and is there anybody here tonight who is gone all the way in science? You have like a science degree, or you're deep into science? A couple people. And here's the thing, that in reality, things are never really that clean or perfect in nature. It's never going to be that way. But in their mind, it was like everything is moving in perfect circles. So if things don't seem like they're in a perfect circle, well, we're probably just measuring it wrong. Because that's just taken for granted. It's all perfect. It's all in a circle. And then they also took for granted the idea that the earth is at the center. Okay? So Copernicus comes along, and he, puts forth this idea. And other people had already put forth this idea, and the ancient Greeks had already talked about this as well. A lot of people had thought about the earth going around the sun and not vice versa. But anyway, Copernicus, as he's dying, he just kind of leaves that behind, like he didn't even want to come out with it while he's alive. But he came out with it as he's dying. And it was kind of an earth-shattering thing of hey, actually, the sun is at the center, and it's the earth going around the sun. But he still stuck to these perfect circles, so it still didn't really work perfectly. And you had to have all these weird little smaller circles and just things that didn't make sense, because if you look up at the sky, it's not all that perfect, right? And I'm going to be done soon, all right? Just stay with me. Don't go dying on me now, okay? So here's the thing. After Copernicus, okay, this other guy comes along named Tycho Brahe. And Tycho Brahe is a guy who just did a lot of naked eye observations, because this is before telescopes were a big thing, okay? Tycho Brahe just does decades of naked eye observations and just writes down all of this super exact data, okay? And here's the thing, this data is not matching the circle thing. Okay? So then another guy comes along called Galileo, and what Galileo does is he improves the telescope, and then he points the telescope up at the sky, and he starts doing observations that prove that it's impossible for the Earth to be at the center of the solar system. So and there's just easy proofs that he could explain to even non-scientists, non-mathematicians. Galileo is just advertising and showing people, look, the phases of Venus, look at these moons of Jupiter. He just has all these things that he can show you with a telescope, showing you that, hey, this doesn't work. The Earth cannot be at the center, okay? Then the next guy to come along is Kepler. Okay, Kepler comes along, and what Kepler does, he takes all of those really good observations from Tycho Brahe, and he figures out a way to actually make them work by getting rid of the circles and understanding that the orbits are elliptical, right? Meaning that they're not a perfect circle. And here's the thing. A lot of people misunderstand this. A lot of these ellipses are just barely elliptical, okay? So they still would look like a circle to you. They're just really barely warped into ellipses. And then Kepler is able to take the data from Brahe and just make it work perfectly. Finally, things are adding up. Finally, things are clicking, and it's an ellipse, okay? But here's the thing about that is, still people don't understand why. Why is it moving in an ellipse? Why are these things going around in a circle nonstop? Nobody has any clue until Isaac Newton comes along, and Isaac Newton explains the why by discovering the theory of gravity and understanding that and gravity doesn't just mean that things, everybody always knew that the apple is going to land on your head if you sit under the apple tree long enough. The point of gravity is that these large objects are exerting pull upon one another, and that the larger the object and the closer they are together, the greater the force of attraction. And so that was just like, okay, now we get it. We got the ellipses, we've got Newton explaining why. Now we not only know what's happening, we know how it's happening, why it's happening, and ever since then, this has just been well-established science, and we've built upon that, and so many more discoveries and so much more technology. This is the basis of the scientific revolution. First of all, understand that the oldest science is astronomy.